Yeah. I'd like to call this special meeting of the Tri-Board, Board of Selectmen, Columbia Board of Education, Columbia Financial Planning and Allocation to order Wednesday, November 8th, Yeoman's Hall at 7 p.m. So I have to get this. This is a hybrid public meeting. The public can attend in person or electronically. The public review the recording afterwards on the Town of Columbia website. And for public input should have been in or. The rules for this are we do it in a respectful manner. If you want to say something, please be acknowledged by, I guess, myself, or I'll be running the tri-board meeting. And we will listen, no interruptions, please, and it will be respectful. Across all lines, okay? I say that because it's written here, not because I expect anything different. So, extending that, first thing I'd like to do is please join me in the pledge of allegiance. I move that we approve the agenda as written.
I'll second.
All those in favor? Opposed? Unanimous. Great. Before we get into the purpose of the meeting, Election Day was yesterday. For all those who submitted their names with the desire to be elected, I thank you. The town thanks you. For those who are changing seats and have served, we appreciate it. And for the newcomers who may be here, who want a seat, I appreciate that too, to stand up for what is right in the community. I think serving is probably one of the greatest callings that you could have in any capacity, to serve the people around you with very little thanks, sometimes a lot of aggravation, but it's something you've all decided to do. And again, I thank you. Between the winners and the losers, there are no losers. What you've done in your heart is a good thing. But I gotta tell you, the epitome of serving the community tonight, I want to thank our outgoing 5-pack chairman, Ernie Sharp, who I think that the chair of 5-pack probably rivals that in responsibility of that of the first selectman. For 2 months out of the year, it's probably the worst hated job gone. You try to put together how we spend the public's money. It's a tough job. But if you don't do it for the right reasons, we don't need you. And the man who has done it, who is the epitome of why we serve, again, Ernie Sharp. Ernie, I'm going to miss you. I thank you very much for all you've done in many, many years you put in. You'll be missed, but I still got your number. Ernie Sharp. Want to say anything? But he wants to say it's not me, shut up and move on. I've known him a long time. Great. So, first on the agenda, the purpose of the meeting, we have a large task and large decision to make. So I'd like to do that with factual information. So if you'd like to introduce our guest.
Sure. So good evening, I'd like to introduce Bob Banning and Jim Peckingham from Silver Petroselli and Associates. They're the engineering firm the town recently hired to basically spearhead this project. They look at what the challenges are at the Horace Porter School and to come up with some recommended solutions, which they're going to provide some to. Thank you. Yes, sir.
All right. Well, thank you, Chris. You stole most of my thunder there in introduction. Again, I am Bob Banning, one of the principals at Silver Petroselli and Associates. I head up our group of 19 mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and fire protection engineers. Jim Peckingham, one of our senior engineers with us today, is heading up the study and design of Horace Porter. And we have started our tasks. We have performed and hired a contractor to perform some of the initial testing of the facility, studied the equipment, and started and worked through options that we think would help improve the indoor air quality and comfort level within the facility. It's something we have done for a number of other municipalities in the state, of course, going back years, but most recently as part of the state DAS grant funding that many municipalities like yourselves are trying to make use of or considering to make use of. So with that, I think, Mark, you get the slideshow up, and I will hand it over to Jim just to walk through our initial findings.
Good evening, everyone. Safe for having us. Hopefully this is, I haven't made this too long. It's a little different than last week. We've replaced a few slides and eliminated a couple, but I'm gonna mostly read through the slides and I'll embellish a little bit on a couple of them. And hopefully I won't put you all to sleep. The AC upgrades. So the purpose of the project is due to issues related to indoor air quality and high indoor humidity that was discovered. The Horace Porter School building exhibits high indoor humidity. We know that we measured due to excessive air infiltration rates and possible water vapor infiltration. Due to poor site drainage, there's a depression on one side of the A wing, and we think that water may be getting under the slab there. And it was evidenced by measurements that we took in the building and blower door testing that was performed by RPM. There was no evidence of water intrusion that we could find. It is possible that water vapor is migrating into the building through the floor slabs, foundation wall, and the earthen floor of the tunnel, the high tunnel. Existing system serving classrooms consist of centralized exhaust with operable windows for ventilation. These are no longer considered appropriate for schools due to excessive energy use, poor temperature control, and substandard indoor air quality. Additionally, existing infiltration is more than twice that required for ventilation per the mechanical code, contributing to excessive energy use, poor temperature control, and substandard indoor air quality. The Connecticut legislature has adopted EPA's rules for schools, requiring boards of ed to perform annual indoor air quality assessments to identify and improve indoor air quality problems.
That the way put on and as well.
And this is the mechanical code is more or less aligned with ACRE, which really produces the standards that we abide by in our business. ACRE standard 62.1 has means of determining what ventilation rate should be for occupied buildings. And normally we would design to the ventilation rate requirement, and that's essentially the equation to use, cubic feet per minute, the CFM of outside air is determined based on the number of people, plus the square foot of the occupied area. And, for this project, we used 500 occupants. I think the school enrollment's about 440. We figured another 60 or so staff. We use the diversity factor, knowing that everybody's not in the same space all the time. They're moving around the building. Students are going from classrooms to the gym or to the cafeteria, art or music. And then the CFM per person is added to that. And we, in our calculation, we came up with about 15,000 CFM for the entire building. The existing air infiltration equals the sum of the active exhaust fans, the fans that are running at any time, minus air supplied through the air handling equipment. That's 39,000 CFM approximately. So we need 15,000. You have 39,000, so it's more than twice what's required. Let me just say, regarding that, that is air that needs to be heated. It's unfiltered, unconditioned air. It's often humid air when the outdoor conditions are such. So it's not good to overventilate. In some cases, it might be appropriate. In this case, it would be detrimental. The most commonly specified systems for HVAC retrofit of school classrooms and offices today are variable refrigerant flow systems with dedicated outside air systems. And here is a little diagram of what a DOAS, VRF system might look like. On the right side is the DOAS unit. And so it's supplied upward to each occupied space. And you'll notice next to where the DOAS is feeding into the space is another box. Those are fan coil units or terminal units, typically ceiling cassettes. And they are fed from an outdoor unit, which you see on the left.
Pretty line here, right?
So those units do either heating or cooling. If one classroom or one office space needs cooling, another one needs heating, they can operate independently of each other. Next slide, please. And there's what the equipment looks like for a VRF system. There's a ceiling cassette in a typical school. There's the outdoor unit. Sometimes the outdoor units might look a little bit different depending on how they're configured. They could be mounted on grade or on the roof. I know this project has a lot of PV panels on the roof. We may need to locate some on grade, but you can see they don't have a very large footprint, so we could probably fit those on the roof. And likewise for the DOAS, which I think is the next slide. And a typical DOAS unit, it's basically a rooftop unit that is a little beefed up. It's capable of dehumidifying and delivering neutral temperature air to the space, so it's not intended to affect the space heating or cooling. Or to address the space heating and cooling. It's just intended to deliver the ventilation air that's required. VRF with DOAS are well suited to schools due to exceptional performance and relative ease of installation in existing school buildings, as well as the ability to provide excellent indoor air quality. Again, you're delivering the amount of ventilation that you need. It keeps the ductwork small, and that's why it's well suited. If you're heating and cooling the space with a rooftop unit, you need to deliver 3 to 4 times the amount of air. With a DOAS, you're just delivering the ventilation air, about 25% of the total that would be required for cooling, because the VRF is doing the heating and cooling in the space. Large spaces such as gymnasiums, auditoriums, cafeterias are more suited to unitary type equipment, such as packaged rooftop heat pumps or split system heat pumps with air handling units. And there's a typical rooftop unit on one of our projects. It's not much different than a DOAS unit, except that it's delivering more air. Here we have a comparison of systems that have typically been used in schools. The one on the left is the ASHRAE baseline. That is what the energy code tells us we must design to as a minimum. Then you see how other systems perform. The best performing system is a chilled beam system. Well, of this comparison, it's conceivable that there's other possibilities, but chilled beams with ground source heat pump has very good performance, but they're also very expensive to install. And a project like this might require 40 to 60 boreholes, maybe 300 feet deep with piping and to absorb heat and reject heat into the earth. The system that we're talking about, the VRF with DOAS, it's just marginally less efficient to operate in the heating and cooling mode. And that is much more easy and affordable to install, and has a good life cycle performance. The 2021 facilities air conditioning feasibility study performed by BBH Integrated Services recommends modernization of the HVAC with systems similar to those discussed here. VRF with DOAS and unitary equipment for larger spaces. There are currently, I added this, you may or may not be able to get incentives from the utility depending on the conditions of the grant, and you may decide to do some portion of this work in the future, not related to this grant application. And you should know that there are substantial incentives available from Eversource for heat pumps and VRF systems that can cover a large portion of the equipment cost. And a summary of the presentation. Air infiltration into the school due to the operation of the centralized exhaust systems exceeds required ventilation, and much of the air is untreated. It appears that there may be some moisture infiltration into the building due to grading issues at the A wing, but it is likely not a major contributor to the humidity issues. Maintaining the building at a positive pressure with the new HVAC systems will reduce moisture infiltration. DOAS units will allow control of indoor humidity. Existing HVAC systems do not meet current standards for indoor air quality and energy efficiency. Adding air conditioning without addressing ventilation and energy efficiency would likely not be eligible for state grant funding. Questions?
I have some. Yes, we asked some questions the other night, so I've gotten some of this, but if you have any questions, please ask. The excessive air infiltration that we currently have, 39,000, you say we need 15,000. Can the current system be, I don't know if you can dial it back that it brings in 15,000?
You could, to some extent, there are some areas like toilet rooms, the kitchen, any areas that maybe art rooms might require a higher exhaust rate, and you might not be able to dial those down as much. But you're still bringing in unfiltered, unconditioned air, and it's not going to help the humidity or the air quality problems. I think if you were to do that, the best way would probably be to put 2-speed motors or variable speed motors so that you could have that additional airflow in the summer or in times when the outdoor air conditions are good and you want that extra air to cool the classrooms. Many of the classrooms do not have air conditioning at all.
And currently you said that we're only required to do testing. We're not required to do this system. We're just required to do testing, to take appropriate action should the humidity or the be too high.
That's how I understand it, yeah.
For the school, can you tell me how many days over or under temperatures of concern we average per year?
This year we had to close early 3 days.
That's this year, pretty rough year so far, but that's why I said average.
We typically, it's a day or two a year that we would close early. That said, we try to move, sometimes we have to move classrooms into the library or a cooler space for heat. We had to evacuate that evening for several months last year or year before.
So you bring up the A lane, would you say that is our greatest concern for moisture and temperature control?
This time, yeah.
Okay, so that does face the entire, does face the south side, so I'm glad you brought that up. The DOAS brings in the outside air and purifies it, and the VRF are they splits? That's what we talked about the other night.
It's similar to a multi-split system, but it's a larger scale than what you would typically think of as a multi-split that you might have in your house. One outside unit, maybe 4 or 5 in there, or as few as 2. But yes, it's a type of split system.
So in my house, and my wife and I went away for the weekend, I couldn't get the splits to work, and what happened was one of the batteries on the control on the thermostat died. And the last time it was programmed was in the summer when they needed AC. So we couldn't get the heat to turn on the other splits until somebody came out, changed the battery. You said that one room could run cool and one room could run hot. On the system that I have in my house, the system that was in this house, I understand the residential, you could not run opposite for that condensing unit. Are you telling me it's different?
There are 2 types. There's a heat pump type system, what they refer to as a heat pump type system. That entire system, keep in mind that you could have multiple systems, but a given system can operate in either the heating or cooling mode. And if we were to use those, we would range them by exposure. So we would not have one unit serving, say, an east and a west exposure. We would have separate. The other type is a heat recovery system, and that is mostly what I'm referring to. They're the more efficient type because one unit could be heating while another is cooling. The compressor is running at a low output just to keep the refrigerant moving. So the unit that's doing the heating is actually running more like the outdoor unit would be in the cooling mode and vice versa. So those are the ones that we would typically expect unless there was good reason not to.
Are those the ones you spec in the preliminary cost here?
Yes, and I think the cost would not be much different because the components are similar.
Okay, the other night you talked about it and I experienced it in my house. My splits are on one side of the house, on this end of it, the other one is on this side of the house. I use a fan to rotate the air so it's in a more evenly distributed. In the size of the classrooms that we have in Porter, are we going to need fans or some sort of propellant to move these things around?
I don't believe so. On a typical 900 square foot classroom, we would have 2 cassettes. The fan speed is variable, and I'm certain that we could move the amount of air because we have, and it's worked well. And keep in mind, we also have air being supplied to the room by the DOAS, and that's creating air movement and circulation, so that would assist. And that's one reason why we wouldn't use a VRF system in a gymnasium or an auditorium. With the ceiling this high, it might not be the best choice.
And the last thing that concerned me is you grant with Eversource, there's conditions, and you don't know them. You don't know if we could get grants from Eversource for the equipment if we accept the grant from the state.
Right. I think what might happen there is the state would get the grant money if, or not the grant money, would get the rebate money if they were paying for a portion, and that we would need to, look into that a little bit.
Are we the first school that you've done with this system?
No.
That has gone after the grant?
We did,
Yeah, so we have, right now we have, 8 schools through the city of Waterbury that successfully were granted the grant money under the first phase. We're doing 6 more through Waterbury now, 1 in Trumbull and 4 in Region 18, Lima.
Okay, could I ask you if you could call somebody at those areas you're doing that and see if they've applied for the Eversource grants rebates also and get an answer for us?
Yeah, that actually might be better if we could reach directly out to the state on that. Our assumption is that it's gonna work like normal DAS funding would, that they view grant money, through Eversource, which is state funded, as being sort of double dipping with the state, and basically any grant you get through that gets a portion based on your reimbursement rate. So it isn't of zero value to you, but it's of limited value, but you can certainly verify that.
Thanks, thank you.
Yes. I was reading through the prior meeting. There was a little bit different verbiage about the grading as a possible solution to mitigating some of the water infiltration on the A wings because of the depression and whatnot. Is your proposal including grading or not? I'm confused on that.
Well, yeah, we haven't specifically included grading or, subsurface drainage improvements in the cost estimate. Because our preliminary review of this, thinks that that's not the primary cause for humidity within the building. Certainly not ruling out inclusion of that in the scope, although it could complicate matters with the state. Although I think we could successfully argue that it would be part of the indoor air quality improvement.
and one thing, I was unaware of until today, there is a catch basin where the grading is pitched towards the building on the lower level of the A wing. So that would address part of our concerns with water infiltration. Really, what I was thinking is there's groundwater. There's always groundwater in Connecticut that any runoff due to grading towards the building would percolate and end up being part of the groundwater. And with the slabs and the foundation wall, we're not too concerned. We didn't see any evidence of liquid water intrusion. But when we took humidity measurements at the tunnel, at the entrance to the tunnel, those numbers were pretty high and close to 70% relative humidity, where in the corridors and platforms were in the low 60s. So we think it's water vapor that is migrating into the space due to essentially groundwater. And again, we didn't see anything more than normal weathering on the exterior of the building. And no sign of water penetration indoors.
What's the life of these units that you're proposing?
I think 20 years, could possibly get more, but I believe Ashtrey has a table where it rates the life expectancy of different equipment, and I believe that these are 20-year systems.
Echoes, that's the major component. So it should a DOAS unit fail, throwing out associated ductwork and controls and everything. They don't want anybody to think that, there's a $6 million bill, maybe 15 years from now to fully replace this system.
It's like an old car, we keep it running, but at some point it makes sense to replace major components. And often you'll see a facilities manager will have a maintenance program, and they will start to fund looking to 10 years down the road, and 5, 10, maybe 15 years in increments for funding capital improvement projects. It would include, replacement of compressors, fans, the major components that would wear out. The refrigerant piping is going to wear out, ductwork. We may need to replace the coil, from time to time. I think we get more than 20 years from now.
Ashley?
I have a question. There was a lot of numbers and I don't pretend to be a mechanical engineer, so can you dumb it down for me? Are we in violation of the law as it stands right now as a school?
Well, we could not build this school now today with the HVAC system that it currently has. So, you know, the school was obviously built in accordance with the code it was designed under. You know, there's no current legislation that would force you to change it. Now, there is obviously the new state requirement to study your indoor air quality. None of us knows for sure where they're going with that, and whether they will eventually get to a point of enforcement for improvement. Meeting the other day, I speculated that they could treat it similarly to the way they treat reviewing your handicap accessibility for schools. They don't force you to change it, but eventually they will come to a point when you go to ask for money for other improvements where they tell you you need to address your accessibility conditions in order to get money for your other improvements. The indoor air quality may very well fall into the same position.
But at the moment, it's up and then you don't have any projected time frame for it though.
Yes,
So on that point though, in the education spec that you provided in the rationale, and maybe this might go to part of what Kelly had asked. You had noted that with the negative building pressure that's prevalent in this type of system, right? Maybe times when classroom windows are closed, right, and the outside air required for the exhaust makeup provided by the several air handling roof units via the central corridor, which is not in line with current mechanical code, right? There's a prohibition, so can you elaborate on that?
yes, the mechanical code, and NFPA prohibit using an exit or exit access corridor as a circulating airflow. The concern being that a fire in one space could be spread through the corridor, and it made it difficult for people to escape the building. So that's.
I'm sorry, say that again, please.
Yes, the code does not allow us to use a corridor as a circulating airflow. So when the windows are closed, there is a unit in, I think it's the cafeteria that is supplying air. This is from the BVA, by the way. It's supplying air, the doors are open, and that makeup air to the exhaust serving the classrooms is flowing through the corridors. If there was a fire in the cafeteria, it could fill the corridor with smoke, and that's the concern. So makeup air to any space other than toilet rooms cannot be provided from the corridor or an access to it, an exit corridor.
So, the VRF units you're stating here. I still, with the DOAS system, bringing in the unpolluted outside air and filtering it before working in the classroom, I still have a hard time with that. So I'm gonna ask you, does the VRF, when you have them on, do they maintain or eliminate some of the moisture when the rooms, you're running the air conditioning or the heat? Does that eliminate some of the moisture? Because that's coming from outside air.
Well, it does, but the DOAS unit is conditioning the air and it's bringing it in at neutral temperature and humidity. So it's or it can be even drier if it needs to dehumidify the space. The indoor units of the VRF do have a cooling coil. The coil gets below dew point, so it will condense, and those units have a drain. If there was a humidity issue in a classroom, the ceiling cassettes would remove the humidity and maintain somewhere between 40 and 60%.
So the answer, both systems work to control humidity.
Normally, we expect to see very little condensate, moisture removal from the indoor units. It's mostly done by the DOS unit, but, you often have spaces that were, well, any occupied space, you have humidity being generated in the space by the occupants. It's not a lot, but it can be significant, and the cassettes will remove that moisture.
But the VRF units will also assist in controlling.
Correct.
Another question? Have you calculated the annual incremental increased cost of having these systems?
In terms of energy use,
Energy use cost, whatever, electric bills, whatever other costs there will be, maintenance.
yeah,
Yeah, we haven't done a careful and detailed calculation. It's really an energy modeling task. I think, I was able to come up with a pretty rough number, just based on the, what you saw on that bar chart that was on the screen, and I think the number was something like $50,000 annual savings in energy. It depends on a lot of things, the energy cost at any given time.
that's a savings over a baseline system.
Right.
Right. I think you need to anticipate that your energy use will increase with the implementation of this system, because you are bringing in, you are doing work to bring in filtered conditioned air and your air conditioning, allowing for building.
That's true. The heating efficiency will be much higher with the system, so that may be somewhat of a balance there. It may wash out.
So we don't really know if it's gonna cost us more to have this every year than it is this year.
Well, it's gonna cost you more, I think. Ultimately, it's gonna cost you more because there's not just the cost of running the systems. The DOAS unit is very efficient. It's got an energy recovery feature. It's extracting in the heating mode. It's taking about 70% of the heat that would be exhausted to the outdoors and transferring it to the incoming airstream. So that's a big savings. The units are also made to be very efficient in their cooling and heating operation. So this it's one of the best, as you saw on the bar chart. Also, the VRF system, the heat recovery type VRF system, is running so it's able to cool and heat simultaneously. So I don't think you would see a big change in your annual energy use, but we can model that. We can do it in-house. We have a company that often assists us with that. When we're busy to do it ourselves, we farm that out to a company that specializes in that. I think I mentioned them in one of the things in the, well, it was separate. It was a document that expounded a little bit on the bar chart. It talked about partnering with consultants, and they do that type of energy modeling. Yeah.
I have a few questions. Do we have shades on the windows? Are they used in the summer? I didn't know that. I assume this has filters.
Filters, yes.
And so what are we talking about costs for changing the filters, and who does those filters, and how often?
Yeah, it can be done a few different ways. I think we normally see a 6-month cycle on replacing filters. It can be done by town staff, school staff, or it can be subcontracted out to the service contractor that can do that. It can also test the units annually.
And how many filters are we talking about, and how much are they per filter? I mean, that's another factor in our costs.
Well, I can get back to you with a better answer on that.
Yeah, I have 3 splits and 1 condenser, they charge me $400 to come out, and I clean my own filters. They charge me $400 to come out and check it once a year, all that, for 1 condenser, 3 split. We're talking multiple, okay.
And I have no question. Did we do a mold test?
We did not.
We have done,
But you haven't recently, so my question is, if we put in this fancy new system. And if there's mold in the air, because there's humidity infiltrating, like you said, in the tunnel. Isn't that gonna get into the system and pollute the whole system?
No, that's part of the reason for using a system like this. It's designed to maintain relative humidity indoors that is not conducive to mold growth,
Yes,
between
you're-
40 and 60.
Your system that you're talking about is bringing outside air in and conditioning that.
Right.
You're not talking about the air that might already be in there that's humid, that we haven't dealt with because.
Well, that's going to be flushed. That air is going to be flushed. It won't be after running the system for a short period of time.
But will it not contaminate the system?
Well, the filters will remove the mold spores. The MERV 13 filters that are the minimum standard will trap particles much smaller than mold spores.
I also had, so if you do this, so you're saying that our air infiltration is more than double of what it should be.
Correct.
Now, I'm assuming it's coming in, but you're pulling in air, so it's coming in around the doors. And so don't we still need to caulk and insulate in order to stop this air infiltration? Because just because you're pushing instead of pulling, now you're not pushing out through the wall. Those gaps, that stuff is still all gonna need to be addressed.
Well, with the system as it was installed currently, your existing system, you really were relying on infiltration when the windows were closed, right? With the systems that we install, we typically have neutral to slightly positive pressure. So instead of infiltration, you have exfiltration, and that helps avoid unfiltered, unconditioned air from
I'm
infiltrating.
talking about efficiency, not talking about the filter.
Yeah, you're talking about losing energy by moving out of the, right?
So I mean, it's still something, if the school is that area, it's still gonna need to be addressed. I would think.
I'm not-
I mean, if we're talking about energy efficiency and and I don't understand how it can be more energy efficient and everybody's talking about energy efficient, and we have to upgrade our electrical system. For some reason, that just doesn't compute in my head, but that's okay. I still think that, I know in my own home, I sit there and I caulk windows and I insulate around, I've pulled all the windows, moldings off and insulated around them, and I've done all that kind of thing. And doesn't that still need to be done?
I think there's probably been some sealing that was done to the building originally, and it may have been maintained over the years. And certainly, if you have large gaps in your envelope, you want to fill those. There may be some benefit to looking at the insulation, the existing insulation in the building. But I don't think that is going to make the system work any less well for the building. It's going to improve the situation in the building that you have, and by maintaining a neutral or slightly positive pressure, you're avoiding cold air coming into the building. And that's typically how we design. And for years, buildings were designed to be somewhat porous.
Because you bring in fresh air, especially.
Well, yeah, by exhausting at a high negative pressure where you had no other way to ventilate the building but to allow the building to be porous. In this case, and you had exhaust fans that were creating that large negative pressure. Here, we're going to have a system that maintains a pressure that's relatively neutral between the indoors and the out, maybe slightly positive. A slightly positive space avoids drafts. People won't feel cold air spilling in through, cracks, or it's typically people that are sitting next to the exterior walls that will feel cool when you have a negative pressure in the space, but, with this system, you won't have that to the extent that you do currently. And you mentioned, we're upgrading the electrical service, and that doesn't really compute how we're upgrading the electric service, but we're supposedly making the building that's more energy efficient. Well, you're reducing your fuel use, you're using oil. I assume, most likely oil. I don't think you got gas on the site, and you're reducing that fuel use in favor of a more efficient electric system. Now, granted, electricity costs a little bit more, and this point where we will want to switch to the boilers and not use the heat pump function of the VRF and DOAS to save money. You're maybe using a little bit more energy that way, but you'll save money by burning fuel instead of the more expensive electricity.
So is this integrated into the system that we already have?
The boiler system, yes, yeah, the boiler system and its piping would remain, I call it as a backup, but it's also there to, as Jim said, address times when it's especially cold outside, those 2 or 3% of the year. The VR are not going to keep up with the full heating demand of the building.
Is that all automatic?
It's automatic, and we can set it up a couple different ways. We can set it up so that when you reach a certain outdoor temperature, that the heat pump function does not work as efficiently.
Right.
It switches to the boilers.
20 or something, heat pumps are good.
17, these will work down to minus 13 or 14 degrees, but they're not very efficient at that temperature. Some are rated to, well, they have a rated heating capacity down to 0 to 5 degrees.
So what happens, okay, so when you're switching into boiler mode, because it's, 0 out. Is the DOAS system still there, filtering air, and just the other one is not, the heat pump is not?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, the DOAS system is running year round when the space is occupied, when the building is occupied. And the VRF would shut down in favor of internal radiation. Or it could either shut down completely depending on how it's set up, or it could run at a reduced capacity. I think in this case, we would have it shut down at an outdoor air set point to favor the boiler system.
I think that's all my questions.
I would like to make a correction from last week's meeting, the grant, the percentage of the grant. I see here that we corrected it to what I remember, the town covers 52% of the value. And the grant, if we get it, is 48%. It was different on last Tuesday or last Wednesday. So, 51, which would be the grant, and I said, no, I think it's around 47, 48. Just has been corrected. Thank you. So I just want to summarize, made a lot of stuff. Our existing system, we can lessen the amount of air infiltration. Okay. There's 2 to 3 days that a year, I'll say 5, that you have to let out early due to heat. That's the key. If we cover the moisture in the A ring and put in the VRF, we can handle the heating and the air conditioning. So each room is comfortable at the teachers or the classroom necessity. And above that, the DOAS brings in the outside air, purifies it, helps circulate it. That kind of,
It's pretty much it. The DOAS is responsible for ventilating the school instead of the exhaust fans and operable windows. Of course, the operable windows and the non-conditioned spaces also help to cool the space, but when it's above 80 degrees out, you're not really getting any cooling.
So that's why we would have the VRF unit.
Correct.
Okay.
The VRF, and of course, that is doing heating and cooling. One point that I didn't really make, and I think it may be important to some or all of you, is that, I think your typical student kids are pretty resilient, they can endure a hot classroom. I know most of us have probably sat in hot classrooms when we were kids growing up. A system like this, I would just think it makes it better for those kids who may have asthma or allergies or some other problem. And I know that you addressed that by having classroom air conditioners in classrooms that need that for IEP purposes, but this treating the building this way, the OS and the VRF makes it, I think, more palatable for not just the kids who don't have with poor indoor air quality, but it makes it better for everybody.
So currently, our indoor air quality, not the temperature, and if we eradicated the moisture, our indoor air quality, is that bad at Porter School?
Well, if you take a day that has poor outdoor air quality, we have wildfires, or in the summer when it's very hot, you have ozone problems. You probably have pretty bad indoor air quality based on the outdoor conditions, but also all this is driven because of COVID, I think, and COVID isn't the only infectious disease. So it helps to improve the indoor air quality. It helps to reduce the number of days absent, both students and teachers, from illness that they would get in a space that microbes are floating around in the air, not being removed by the filtration, and also that the conditions that we're maintaining in the space, ideally 20 to 60% RH are more ideal for that same reason. The microbes, viruses, and bacteria don't thrive in those conditions.
And our current air transfer in the class is not existent, or it's just, I mean, you bring in 39,000, you say that's too much. It can't all be going in, some's gotta go out for the whole building.
Right, well, you have exhaust fans, which are the impetus for the air movement into the space. The exhaust fans are drawing air out. I think the way this school is set up, you have a number of exhaust fans that are inducted to each classroom, creating a negative pressure in the classroom. And that air is made up through porous construction or open windows. Obviously, when the wind, well, it might not be obvious, but when the windows are open, there's less restriction to the airflow, so you get more.
But, yeah,
I'm very confused how filtering air that's coming in from house is going to filter the viruses that are on the inside.
Well, this also filters in the VRF units,
And and your filters are small enough to catch the teeny weeny virus. Because the
this
masks,
is- Well, the masks are not equivalent to a MERV 13 filter.
well, I mean, that's why I'm asking.
Yeah,
I mean,
So-
I know the viruses that are typically around that are going to be very sick are extremely small and put through most filters.
Keep in mind, the DOAS unit is not just supplying air, it is pulling air out of the space. It's, certain.
But that's kind of my point.
it's
So
delivered.
it's kind of, in my humble, uneducated opinion. You're sucking in fresh air and shutting it outside, you're dragging viruses with it. And that's, when I wanna freshen out my house in the winter, if somebody's sick, and I bring in cold, fresh air, and I've read just a little point of that. My mother grew up in Norway in the 30s. She never missed a day of school. Her and five of her siblings never missed a day of school. And those buildings, once an hour, all the children were kicked out. All the windows were open, doors were open. They spent 10 minutes outside breathing fresh air. The rooms got ventilated, shut it back up, and that's how they kept disease at a minimum. And she was a nurse and worked in a hospital back in the 40s. And in that hospital in Oslo, every day, every patient's room, the window was open for an hour and the room was ventilated. And the patients were covered up, but they got fresh air. And that's how they manage disease. So I don't understand how a filter is going to work better than fresh air. Because we're not in New Haven with car exhaust, because I'm allergic to the car exhaust. I left the valley because of pollution. It made me sick. I came out here expecting to get my spring asthma, never got it again. Because we're clean here, we have trees, it's just different.
But you also have allergens that, you may not have problem with seasonal allergies.
I
Many
have
people do.
horrible problems with season.
Well, many people do, when you do have all the sources of, pollen and mold and, things that go along with, that cause seasonal allergies here. You're out in the countryside, you have crops, you have, greenery, you're gonna have mold and pollen. I'm not trying to sell you on the system. I'm showing you a system that is probably the most efficient system that you could get for the dollar. If you want to air condition and ventilate your school in a more efficient way. That's good.
It's my understanding, one of the tests that is performed, I think either by your group or your subcontractor, where you might, seal in, right? The doorway, lower upper, you could measure exchange rates between the lower floor and upper floor. So can you elaborate on what your results were?
The numbers that they saw were less than, the 39,000 CFM that I showed in the slide. I think the reason for that being that they test at their fans are capable of a certain pressure. The exhaust fans that are installed are designed and balanced for the 39,000 CFM, so that's what we're going to see. I think the number that the company RPM came up with blower door test was about 20,000, but we don't feel that that's a real world condition that you're experiencing when your exhaust fans are running.
Is that what you were talking about, the 3 versus the 12?
Yeah, they basically said that the first floor was much tighter than the second floor. There really is no infiltration, no ventilation. So it's looking for air from everywhere else. So that's why it's drawing it down the hallway.
And I think that was what BVH found as well in their study that I believe it was the cafeteria units was providing makeup air through the corridors to make up that 39,000 CFM.
I don't know what that is. What does that mean?
Oh, I think they verified that there was air infiltration into the building. They tested 3 areas and we saw infiltration on all 3. The amount of infiltration that we saw was greater than our calculated ventilation load and but was less than the sum of the exhaust fans that would be running. So our opinion is that the exhaust fans would be exhausting the CFM that they were balanced to. They were, furnished with motors and they were balanced to provide 39,000 CFM. The lower door test was just I think without a comparison for the lower door test, you don't have, it's somewhat meaningless. It's showing you that you have infiltration at the pressure that the test was conducted at. But that is not the real world situation that you have with your exhaust fans running.
Is that harmful? I mean, you gotta break it down, what is the benefit or the hindrance to that? I don't understand. What we just talked about.
Of the blower door test?
Yeah,
Well, it was a verification of, our understanding that there's air coming into or going out of the building through needs that aren't intended to pass it, right?
okay, well, thank you, that,
Is that why some classes are cold, I assume, in the winter? That they're just drawing more air, it's not a balanced situation.
Yes, you have infiltration. Whether the windows are open or closed, you have infiltration. And it's because all of the air movement in your building, except for the areas that have units, serving those, the rooftop units and the air handling units, the gym and the cafeteria. All of the air movement in the building is created by exhaust fans, so it's causing infiltration. You probably most of you have probably been in schools with old heating systems where in the winter, you control heat in the space by opening closing the windows. The old steam heating systems were not controlled very well. And you could see the heat going, the shimmering of the heat going out of the windows. And the situation here is not much different. I'm sure every classroom has a thermostat and a control valve controlling the radiation that's heating the space, but it's not an efficient way to heat or cool a building.
the other day we talked about. Get it wrong, but just, the first three letters should be correct, ionizing or ionization,
Right.
and there was some discussion on that. And are there ionization units you can put in the current filtration system, the current venting system?
Well, there are, let's take a classroom, for instance, that has no supply air system, it's got an exhaust, you can't, put the ionization system in the exhaust, but they do make the ionizers that can go in space. I think the company that we're most familiar with, makes a product that uses the tube type ionizers as opposed to the needle point. And if you remember last week, I pointed out that the needle point has a problem with creating ozone at the same time as it creates the ions. The ozone being hazardous, so the tube type do not create ozone, and that's the preferred system. We don't feel that you could make enough of the ions to actually do any good with a system that creates ozone at the same time. You would exceed the allowable amount of ozone before you would have a sufficient number of ions to purify the air.
Okay, are you saying to me the units that could go into the infiltration ventilation?
Well, the window opening,
Excuse me?
you mean the window opening? Well,
You'd have to have just a freestanding air filtration in the space.
and they do make those, and, the air is just circulated naturally by whatever convective currents are in the space. But they do make a standalone unit to be installed, maybe wall mounted or ceiling mounted in the classroom. I think they make portable ones that could purify the air.
So I could not make the meeting last week, and I have no idea what you're talking about. Could you expand on what you were actually talking about?
Well, we moved the slide and we decided not to proceed with the discussion tonight, but I'm glad to. It's a way of purifying the air by creating, charged
Negative
ions, negative ions, and, it attacks, microbes, and, renders them inert. And, at the same time, other particulate, it causes them to, take on a charge, and there's negative and positive ions, and the particulate in the air will, because they become charged, they will group together, negative and positive, and, they become large enough to be easily filtered, or fall out of the, just precipitate out of the air. So that's, it's a relatively new technology. We have not installed it. We presented it as an idea and the main reason we would look at it is because it allows us to reduce the amount of outside air that we bring in. I showed you, a method for calculating the outside air, the ventilation rate method. There's a second method, the same ASHRAE standard, the indoor air quality method. And when you use that type of air purification device or system, you can reduce the amount of outside air to roughly 50%, and it would meet the ASHRAE standard. And of course, when we reduce the amount of outside air with the DOAS system, you're reducing the size of the equipment, and you're reducing the energy that goes into heating and cooling outside air. So that was the reason that we were that we presented that, thinking it might be worth consideration, and we have no stake in it, other than we want to do the best that we can do for our clients. And again, we have not installed that type of system anywhere. We would like to see it used. We don't want to experiment with the town of Columbia, but
So I have tremendous issues with air conditioning because it positively charges the air. I get raging headaches, and it's the worst thing I can be in is air conditioning. So I'm assuming that this negatively charges the air as opposed to the positive charge usually what we see in the summer. And so they're making these now, is that what it does, or is it just to take or make particulates and do it? Well,
it's emitting ions into the space, and the ions, I think in the order of billions. So they're able to attack viruses.
I was just curious. What was never
I'm sorry.
But does it, the ionization, does it heat or cool the air?
No.
No change at all.
No, other than I have not experienced one. Supposedly it freshens the air. You can notice there's a noticeable improvement in the freshness of the with the ionization system. I understand that you could create too many of the ions, and it actually is not desirable for some people. I think the rep for the company that manufactures it says that with too many ions, the air can become metallic tasting. But I'm sorry, we were told that it was probably a non-starter, the bipolar ionization. So we decided not to present it tonight.
We are still in the early stages of arguing on it, so obviously, we'll have many more meetings from you if the project moves forward, where we'll certainly take input on lots of details of the system.
I'll also point out that we revisited our estimate from last meeting. And when I started developing the estimate, we are often required to, when getting state grants, follow the Connecticut High Performance Building Standard. And one of the things with that is that the building needs to be certified, the systems need to be certified for, I think it's 20 years. So we've looked at replacing the boilers, the piping, anything that we would not be comfortable certifying for that period of time, for the life of the building essentially. So now we've backed that out of that number, so the overall numbers last, we provided a thumb drive with the new estimate. And we also looked at just doing the A-wing with requested.
Let me just clarify. I did. So you're supposed to certify, or the state requires that the existing, whatever's in there has to be certified for 20 years?
Not in this case, if the high performance building standard were applied to this project, and I was under the impression that it might be when I did the first estimate, the estimate that you saw last week. I understand that the boilers have been repaired recently and they're serviceable, so there's no need to replace the boilers at this point. Likewise with the pumps have been rebuilt, have been furnished with new motors. Piping is sometimes a difficult call. We will often call for ultrasonic testing and measure the thickness of the pipe wall to see if it's eroding and degraded from where it should be, and try to get a sense for if we could certify that for the life of the building. But in this case, with this grant, I don't think that will apply. And so we were able to complete those other items.
Yeah, but I also saw some figures that had contingency and engineering and some other stuff on there that was added to the price tag, preliminary price tag, so then I understand there's some changing that too, so.
Well, I came at the meeting last week, and rather than, speculate or being vague about what it is, you mentioned $6.5 million for the project. What's the new estimate right now? The bottom line for
So the construction cost number is 6.2, 6.3.
quite a little.
That adds up to, we did it all, 7.25 million. It was 6.4, but then you didn't add the contingencies on that, so it brought it to 8.4 from the number I quickly saw today. But it's dropped to 7.2, that's with the contingencies.
Correct.
Okay, and 3.5, what's that?
Is that
Our share?
We did not have the actual reimbursement rate last week.
Oh, yeah.
And so this reflects what we thought the reimbursement rate would be.
Okay, so.
Is that the?
Well, they'll fix it because they're saying 51% reimbursement is actually 48% reimbursement. So our costs will go up.
So that should be the number right there.
It's 7,200,000, and we would be on the hook for 3,700,000.
Correct.
Right, that's our cost, so plus we need for grant purposes, we would want to take into account our contract with Silver Petroselli for reimbursement. So we need to add that.
Yes, that's reimbursable. You want to think that's project cost.
Like the 480, whatever the value of the contract is.
So that's not in the assessment.
Correct.
No, I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying. That's fine. So now I add it in my head and it comes up to, 7,675, give or take.
You want to go over the A-wing only or?
Yeah, that'd be great. .8 million. That's a far cry from 1.8.
Right, well, the aging is 22,000 square foot, so levels versus 100,000 square feet.
Yeah.
Also, you had done a capital improvement project in 2014, replacing rooftop units and the air handling units serving the cafeteria. And because those systems are not at the end of their useful life, we took them out of the estimate. They were in the estimate for that same reasoning, thinking we may have been required to certify this building for 20 years.
So the 7.7 took out for the rooftop units. Well, that didn't,
It was in the 8.4.
yeah, but, you know, you can say that, but it's,
It was 7.2.
where, well, 7.3 in the end. Well, we're going after the grants reimbursement, that's what I'm doing. Okay. Hi, Board of Ed, how are you? Any questions on that side, concerns, asks, understanding?
Well, I'd like to say, I'm new to the whole project. So I don't know what's been done and not done, the first things about testing. Water, the air infiltration stuff and all that. If this was my house. And I have an existing unit that's working. And the air infiltration is high. I would probably seal up the air infiltration, get it to where it's supposed to be. And then I would probably look at the existing unit that I have, see if it's fixable or adapted enough to fix whatever problem we're having. Is it the whole school we're looking at, or is it specifically the A wing that we're looking at to fix?
So I can cover that. It came to us because we have had to shut down the A wing for mold issues. Like, probably 2 or 3 consecutive years that I can recall. Okay. We've moved students out of there. We've got brought in companies to clean and sanitize, and it's lasted for the rest of the school year, maybe a little bit more. Well, let's just say we have to do this once a year. So we've asked about the moisture problem in the A wing. But in addition to the moisture problem, the classrooms in the A wing are very difficult to control the heating in the summer and early fall months. You don't go to school in the dead of summer, so June time frame, September time frame, when it can get very hot and very uncomfortable. And they can really, there's not good, if any, air conditioning. I don't think there's any, correct?
There's window units.
There's window units that are out there, let's just say.
So airflow is awful. I'm assuming. So the air
Yes, you can
circulation
open the windows. So but also the circulation and the system over there. One room could be extremely warm, a next room could be fine, and another room across the hall could be cold. It's just an outdated and not efficient for temperature control, probably for money, if you're using, air conditioning here, heat over here. So A wing was the big ask. We understand it. And then we said, well, if we're gonna go after $1.8 million, which I was told was a good number, and that included a 10% increase. From a projection that, I forget the last company that came in and did it 3 years ago. They said, and we said, let's take a look at the whole school. We're gonna have a company out here to take a look, we'll take a look at the whole school. So that's why we're here. A wing, moisture control for mold and comfort. In the building itself, it tears away the foundation when it's below grade and it's moist. And also temperature control for A wing.
Yeah, because of also the availability of a grant.
And because we can get a grant,
Take the edge of
maybe we can get a grant, but yeah. So we're looking now, A wing, $2.8 million. $1 million more than what which we talked about a month and a half ago. But if we get the grant, we pay 1.5. And the grant covers that, and any wing should be fine. So if we wanted to do that. Great. But if we get a grant for that, and we're required to do the rest of the school by state legislature somewhere down the line, we probably would not be able to go back after a grant, if there was even a grant available. So the question is, at seven, and we can get 48% in a grant, do we consider doing the entire school? Did I sum it up pretty good? Great. Great.
So if I could maybe just kind of elaborate, and Mike, please help me out here, just so we understand the law, right? So Connecticut General Statute 10-220D talk to Board of Education and the requirements for indoor air quality. That's kind of what we spoke about, right? And they mandate guidelines for indoor air quality, which they recommend guidelines, which in particular, like you mentioned, they refer to the Environmental Protection Agency's rules for schools, and it has a rubric of items schools look at, right? They look at heating, ventilation, air conditioning, radon air levels, controlling moisture, mold, pest management, effective cleaning and maintenance, even some green materials, right? Like certain types of cleaning products, and they gotta be certain, so they've got a whole litany of things which make up the indoor air quality umbrella, right? And you mentioned that's an annual requirement. So according to the statute, right, up until last year, school Board of Education were required to perform this inspection, review, evaluation, whatever you want to call it, every 5 years, right? Last year, right, Public Act 22-118 by our legislature and governor signed, increased that frequency for this indoor air quality requirement from 5 years to 3 years, okay? So school systems now have to increase their frequency in doing this. On top of that, the Public Act created a whole new HVAC assessment criteria, which the schools will have to do starting in, I believe, 2025, it was next year.
2024, we have to do.
Yeah, right, 2024, you have to start doing this, right, and every 5 years, right? And the statute calls out criteria, it's gotta be done by certain qualified people, could be a certified hygienist, and might be mechanical engineer, so it's got criteria for, again, a mandate to do this.
I think you have them backwards. So HVAC's every 3 years by new legislation, air quality's every year.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's why I asked, is our air quality so bad in the school? Are we pulling in all these pollutants into the school?
I don't think it's the pulling in of pollutants. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's the pollutants that are existing in the building, right? So if you've got moisture in the building and you've got mold spores and all of that, yes, you're pulling in outside air, but you're circulating that through a filtration system.
But we've never found mold spores other than A-wing.
No, look at Mike for that.
We've never tested any other ways.
Yeah, and this is not me advocating for or against the HVAC system, but I think there does need to be some point of clarification in there too. You're already paying for filtration systems and what currently exists, right? You do maintenance on the systems that are in there. So one of the questions that had come up earlier was regarding what's the cost per filtration? You're going to be paying cost per filtration, like new filters and maintenance and service on the existing things anyway. Now you're just replacing with an alternate piece. Like, so I know there's some concern about, you know, what's the upkeep cost, but you're already paying an upkeep cost for a system that's failing in the building. But the air quality isn't just about the 3 days that you're closed, right? So I'm gonna say this as a teacher who works in a building that has awful air quality. We have one of those portable systems. The filters are ridiculously expensive in little portable systems too, which means I work for the state of Connecticut, they don't replace them, they don't work. But sounds awful, but it's not just those 3 days it's closed because of heat. It's not just the 3 days. There are kids in certain times of year, you've got viruses circulating around, and think of it like an N95 mask. I know that the other masks don't work, but the N90, the filters are like an N95. So N95, well, okay, so next step, but whatever it is, the filters are meant to filter out viruses. We've been tested to filter out viruses, and I know that that's one of the things
that we're looking to get into the school in some fashion, because you have students that are missing school, you have teachers that are missing school, a hot building, and I mean, we all remember those hot days, and like, we survived them, but those were not high learning days in a building when you're sitting in a hot classroom, you know, with the sun beating in on one side of the building. So I think there's a lot of like, maybe we're oversimplifying some of the issues within the building too.
They asked a question. I said one question. No, okay,
Yes, sir.
I'm looking at the agenda, it says, B, recommendation of the retail committee. Will that be a separate presentation or have that?
Presentation,
Yeah. or has that been-
they'll probably go around and then they'll make a recommendation. I don't think there'll be a different presentation.
No, it was,
Well,
when
I
you
guess
want us to,
the reason I ask is there is a list of very smart people who probably already consider most of the stuff we heard here tonight, and they reached a conclusion, I assume.
yes, we did.
And I hear what that is, and maybe that will make some of the questions unnecessary. But nobody's prepared to do that.
No, they're better be prepared, it's on the agenda, and I said, anybody want to change the agenda? They said no, so they're prepared, or they look
Well, I
prepared.
guess then
But let's, great, I will do that. What's your question?
My question is very simple. Are we gonna, can we get a copy of the two estimates?
Yes.
That's fine.
Anybody else? Gentlemen, thank you. If you want to just hang in there while they talk about their recommendation, then, and then we'll carry on. Call the question. Thank you.
Thank you.
And before, when they say this, and to your question and to Rachel's, you know, I'm not advocating, I'm just, actually, everybody here gets one vote when it comes to the town, if we want to pass it. Everybody just gets one vote. So what we say here, I ask questions, because I don't know, it's not my business. But I ask questions that we're gonna have to stand up in front of the townspeople who are not gonna want to spend, or have to be educated on why we need to spend $7.7 million. So these questions and stuff, it's just to be able to stand up there and maybe, in my opinion, come at us with pitchforks and lanterns and, you know, that type of thing. Please. Thank you. Go ahead, Chris.
Mark, yeah, it's not, you don't need us to go through that, we'll go, but yeah.
All right.
So, you all should have a copy of the, fourth quarter school, air quality improvement project, so this is the, fourth quarter HVAC building community. We put this together and, briefly go over a bunch of stuff, because I know, Bob and Jim already covered a lot of some of it might be in the past, kind of cruise through some of that, but, as a building committee, right, so we were appointed, beginning of this year, as some of you may recall, because we've already gone through referendum. The board of selectmen appointed an HVAC committee and identified members, both, I represent the board of selectmen, and Leah represents, Board of Ed, before it was Christine, but now it's Leah, so we represent the elected officials in the capacities of education and select ed. Fortunately, we have a lot of technical subject matter experts that are part of this, that are professions or recently retired in the HVAC industries, have own businesses, structural engineering. So from a technical perspective, their body of work is also included in this recommendation. So quickly through the members, obviously myself, Leah, we have David Geiser, Guy Waynard, who's here in the audience, and I'm hoping to lean on him in case he has some things he'd like to add or contribute or maybe clarify. Jeff Collins and Alan Harbeck, they were primarily our technical experts. Of course, we have Mike, facilities director, who's on the committee, Barbara, who supported the meetings, and Mark supported the meetings as well, and others that attended from the community. again, it's the same track committee, we've been meeting since January, sometimes weekly, sometimes once a month. Trying to ultimately come up to this point where we can make a recommendation for, this group here. So the problems as we've put together based upon reports that Jim and Bob put together, they gave us a couple weeks, about a week and a half ago, what they called an education spec, which identified their various observations. So like they mentioned before, typical systems rely on central exhaust systems, which are operable, which utilize windows for ventilation, which often entail the negative building pressure, which is prevalent, and certainly comes with high humidity and potential for mold growth. We already talked about in your answer that potential cold violation based upon the exit corridors and whatnot. But that is a problem, right? Granted, in today's lens, today's standards, you know, that is a concern. Back in '93, when the systems were put in place, it was the code. So just, again, just something to consider. And I think what I took from your report, you know, indoor air quality is certainly, you know, as teachers and others in the education staff have kind of said, you know, you need to have a great learning environment, right? And air quality does matter. And if there's substandard air or there's conditions where for some students who have allergies, who have asthma, who may have accommodation per IEP, well, then they need some sort of accommodations. One thing that wasn't mentioned, but Barbara had clarified, that the school does remain open in the summer. You have a summer program in support of children that have additional needs, right, to go through the summer. So the current school environment, you're only limited to certain parts of the building that you can have various classrooms, right? And you're covering 3 through the age of 3 through 8th grade, right? Depending on their IEPs. So you're trying to address needs in limited spaces, I guess. So I had already mentioned briefly the statute, right? We already kind of talked about it. There's some clarifications on that. I think it's fair to say that requirements are underfunded, but they're funded to some extent, right? There's grants there that we need to go out, right? Does it make sense to consider the entire school building? Or do we just want to look at regardless, these mandates are still going to be there, right? Mike and his team are going to have to perform these evaluations annually. The new HVAC assessment is going to have to do every 5 years. It's going to have to submit a report. These reports become part of the public. In order to have to publish this stuff, you have to put it out there. So at some point, again, me speculating 5, 10, whatever years, you're going to have to address these. You're going to have to address why, if you only do anyway, why are you not meeting certain ventilation requirements in the other parts of the building? At some point, you're going to have to answer that, and quite possibly this funding may not be there for the grant. So
just clarify, it's yearly now, but they've changed the testing and reporting. In the beginning January.
So as far as the grant, it's in your slides. I make reference to the public act, which put it in place. It's overseen by the Department of Administrative Services. Per the guidelines, there's now 244 million potentially available. Majority of it is state bonds, 35 million is federal funds. Many of you may recall back in this April, 56 million had already been awarded in the first round. So we're looking to apply for the second round of grants. We have a deadline which is coming up. The grants has to be submitted by the end of December of this year. And the bottom part talks about the matching. Again, I think we had estimated last year roughly about 48% based on what Beverly's experienced with the experience, but still there's a ranking which ranks all the towns. Yep.
Did we apply in the first round or not?
Yep. Yes.
We did, and we were denied.
Correct. Yep. Yep, we applied for just doing 80.
I guess I'm wrong, it was in favor of districts that had already implemented HVAC. Most of the districts that were awarded, the ones that had already put HVAC systems in and were seeking reimbursement for the systems they had already purchased, whereas ours had gone in as a future project.
Yeah, and I don't know if you want, if I could put this spot, I mean, they have, when you had reached out, there were other criteria they consider, right? It was more than just, hey, you guys weren't ready, you only had a DH done, you had an estimate that was 2 years.
Yeah, I did get some feedback on the first round. There was word given to the district that had already completed the project because they had it all done and completed. We weren't too far off. There were some the grant application that flagged. One was not having a more up-to-date formalized grant quote. There was a discrepancy between in some of the minutes on how some of them quote went. That was another discrepancy, and I think there was one little glitch. We had an expect put together, but it wasn't formally approved by the board of ed. So we weren't too far off,
It's a good thing. It's a good thing we were denied. We just put in for A-Wing $1.8 million. We just saw A-Wing is now coming in an estimate of 2.8. It's a good thing we didn't get it.
we did put in an estimate of an increase based on, like Mike checked with, GH. We did put an higher estimate, and we tried to have super formal quotes, but they wanted something more formal, so. So we weren't too far off, based on my conversation with somebody at BAS, so, so, I mean, we're not gonna get it this time, but, you know, we're still in competition with everybody else, so the purpose of this is to try to get it further along, so that it's more, if we're in a better position than we were back in December. Because we got these steps we need to get it all.
The next couple slides, I have a timeline, I'm not gonna go through the dates, you certainly can go through them, but again, I think the important dates. For us to be mindful of, tentatively next week, it's my understanding on the 14th at the Board of Selectmen meeting, it may be on the agenda for the Board of Selectmen to consider. Recommending a town meeting for the appropriation and bonding for this project. Again, it's tentative, it still has to be determined, based upon the timeline in the charter requirements for town meetings, referendum. We tentatively forecasted on the 30th of this month. We would potentially go to a town meeting, special town meeting, kind of like we did earlier this year, and then adjourn to a referendum, which the earliest, based upon the timeline, would be around the 12th of December. But again, if any of this slips a week or so, based upon the Board of Selectmen meetings or requirements or what comes out of these discussions, it's just gonna compress the timeline, because again, this needs to be submitted by Barbara and team by the end of December. Program.
So, for those of us who can figure it out, when you give us the numbers you have now, but when the numbers were for accuracy that, what was the cost of doing the whole thing? The cost for they and what did you tell me I said and recommend?
Sure. So, based on this, let me grab my notes. So the total cost, including contingencies, they had 7.2 million. Which include 10% contingency, for construction, 5% contingency for design. Now, that number did not include, we'd have to add another 418, somewhere around there, right? Because we would want to include our contract in St. Petroselli for the purposes of the total value for the grant. So when they assess us and they say, okay, you guys have 48%, hopefully we get up to 48% reimbursed of their contract with us.
The 400,000 would not be an additional cost of the money we already have and committed
7.7 is what we would put in for the grant.
for the total.
Total,
But we need an additional 7.2 because
7.2 plus their 400 and something thousand is 7.7 million.
That's you're repeating what I said. That's not-
It's no sense.
$400,000 additional cost.
We've already haven't we?
We're going to apply for the grant of 7.7.
We understand.
We have allocated.
That wasn't my question.
Why, he's speaking, I don't know.
That was not my question.
Well, I don't think have we allocated $400,000 to pay them? Yes, we have.
Okay, thank you.
We didn't ask it.
So, did that answer your first part of the question? Yes. So the second part, the A wing only, they had estimated 2.8 million, which included contingencies.
But not theirs,
Exactly.
which is already been added.
And you're recommending we only.
No, so at the time, the committee looked at the entire school. We did not have a breakdown on just the A wing from their estimate until just now, like everyone else. Our charge and the way we had approached it was looking at the entire school. So we would be in a position to recommend the entire system. That's what the town ultimately decided.
Any question you?
Yep.
Okay, I'm just.
Yep.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, right, so it's right, so we looked at the entire school, and that's what we're recommending is the VRF, the lab students that Silver Petrus had recommended. For some of the larger areas like the cafeteria and the gym, there would be the packaged rooftop area system, something similar, the unitary portion of that. So with that, regardless of which way we go, whether it's the A wing only or the entire school, we have to upgrade the electric. And correct me if I'm wrong, the electrical upgrade would be the same cost regardless, right? Because it's through the switch gears, the equipment is needed more for that up the effort and whatnot, based upon.
You need to do some service upgrade regardless of what we do, just the A wing of the whole building.
Yeah.
We would recommend that if we were doing that upgrade, to upgrade these.
Taking into account,
And the full building electrical upgrade is included in the A wing cost.
It's including the A wing cost,
Correct.
but also the entire, has to be finished, so it's.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
so either way, we have to upgrade your.
Correct.
That is included in the original cost.
The estimate, yes, includes the upgrade. Yep. So again, so trying to wrap it all up, we believe as a committee, right, that this new HVAC system that's recommended would help us to be compliant with state and industry standards of maintaining temperature between 70 and 75 degrees Fahrenheit, relative humidity between 40 and 60 percent relative humidity, that's per ASHRAE standard 55. The new systems will be capable of bringing in filtered conditioned air at a rate per standards, and they would meet or exceed minimum efficiency requirements for the program. So again, the benefits, we believe as the HVAC committee, has looked at, we think it's the right thing to do based upon our charge to look at indoor air quality, maintain relative humidity, maintain temperature, filter the air. Again, we talked about energy savings, and I don't think we couldn't put a number to it. But one thing, and again, I guess maybe ask them for, remember when we're locked into an energy supply, right, the Green Skies for, forgot whatever, we signed for 20 some odd years back in 2018, right, Mike? When we sort of put the contract in for the solar, we locked into a really low supply rate. So from an energy perspective, I understand we're gonna draw more energy, but we have the benefit of being locked in for at least 20 years, right? Plus we're supplying a lot, we're probably putting back more to the grid, depending on, conditions. Now we may be drawing more from our existing panels, but, we're set up, I think, well.
I think the system we have only handles 70% of our electrical needs, so we're not putting excess to the grid, we're getting all the credits that we can. It doesn't handle 100% of the electricity usage at the school.
Okay.
It's 70%. That was, I believe that was guaranteed to us. I got a pretty good memory when it comes to that. I think it's 70%. The bottom line is though, it, you know, it's still there, so.
Right, and I'm sorry. So, but the thing is, we're locked into a rate, right?
Yeah.
And maybe electricity's going up, right? Supply wheels going up, world conditions, right? Oil can easily go to $150, $200 a barrel, right? And that could really skyrocket our oil, right? I mean, we've been fortunate to lock in around $2.50 a gallon. But that can easily change with world conditions, right? So this system, again, I know early on we talked about air conditioning and it just two weeks out of the year, maybe it'll cool, but this could be an alternative way to heat the entire school. Possibly create efficiencies and provide, you know, a means to give us options, right? If oil really skyrockets, we could use more of the heating of the system. Now, like I said, we keep the existing boiler systems because that's where our backup generation rate in the case of power outages, we have a needs for generation.
Chris, did the committee have a meeting as to the extent of the changes? Are they recommending the entire school or recommending the 8 weeker or maybe something afterwards?
So the HVAC committee is recommending the entire school. That's the approach, that's what we'll be looking at.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
You know, we're looking at these improvements and basically for the students. You say here, for your comments, and when combining the board, air quality is provides associated learning environment. So if we do all this work, how are we going to quantify with the students that we've actually done something to improve their learning, their environment? Are we going to see test scores increase? You know, how do we measure this as far as that goes?
I mean, we can use reports as a data point, the yearly reports. You could look at test scores, it'll be hard to correlate them to that. We can look at incidents of respiratory illness, decreases.
So we could do all this work and we, you know, we could say, I'm looking at it providing better learning. We don't have a real way to measure this.
We have the data from places where it's been done, where it was said it was gonna happen, they've done it. And then 5 years later, they went in and looked at absentee rates, they looked at health, they looked at, do we have anything that actually supports it?
I guess I'm saying this, which trying to provide a healthier environment for the kids. Has nothing to do with learning. It simply keeps them in school, they don't get sick at all.
Which leads us to learning.
If we go through this, I know that there's gonna be certain rights that we're gonna have to comply with requirements for a year for the air quality, 3 years for the HVAC inspection. Are we getting accommodations as we go through this, if we're putting a whole new system in regarding that?
We'll still have to do testing.
But based on your recommendation, your system would meet the minimum or exceed requirements for ventilation.
You're there install all of your testing and balance, et cetera. These are done by you would have to pay, but
It's also less than remediate once to have.
And I guess maybe I'm throwing this out there, speculating, but it may be hard to measure improvements in learning, but I think all of us would probably agree that if you have a student or so that has certain needs, or let's say they have medical needs, they may have learning needs and all that, and they're not able to stay in certain classrooms because of needs, right? They've got to get pulled out potentially, right, of that environment and taught or block or whatever, they're pulled out among their peers, right? So that in and of itself provides a condition where maybe it's not ideal learning condition for that student. He doesn't have the benefit of being with their classmates, right? So from a least restrictive environment from a learning, you wanna have all students be able to participate in the classroom.
We also have a lot of ADA requirements, staff and students, so we have to put stuff into the classroom. So in that building particularly, those air conditioners during 3, 4, or 5 months of the year are running 24/7. They're running on the weekends to mitigate the moisture. The rest of the building, we have to always have air conditioners and, air purifiers for, students, IEPs, for teachers, medical needs, or other students who don't have IEPs. There's many students who have medical needs. So that there's a constant, every 3 years, we have to replace those window air conditioners. Yes.
Chris, about the committee decision, your recommendation is to do the whole school. Did your committee look at that in a vacuum and just decide it based on what we think is best for the students irrespective of cost, or did you factor in cost as part of your analysis to doing this?
Cost was
Was not part of your analysis at all, you just said, in the perfect world, if money were no object, this is what we would do.
I mean, my understanding of our charge was to provide a technical recommendation to the Board of Selectmen and as a group of electors, right? So from a financial perspective, I mean, we just learned what the financial numbers were last Wednesday evening, right? In a perfect world, if we had more time to go through and analyze costs and all that, but I guess I will clarify that, I mean, we have 4 professionals, right, that are in the industry. Guy, David, Jeff, and Al, right? So, if they saw something outrageous, saying that's ridiculous, when I was in the industry, it would be half that. I'm certain that they would have thrown out, this does not seem like a reasonable price. I mean, we did as a committee, right, we did recommend as part of our motions, we did recommend first the solution, which is the VRF with the DOAS system and the unitary equipment for the larger areas, as well as the original estimate, which was much higher than tonight. So we did recommend that, but to your point, we didn't go through a financial analysis, we looked at it from a technical solution.
Along those lines, Mark, what's the current rate cost of borrowing, do you know?
I think short-term rates are actually higher than long-term at this moment, but I would do the 4% as a interest factor in
The
No,
big,
it's little low
Yeah.
in the current environment.
I'm talking about the line.
I know.
I think
in that-
we just do short-term and don't mind, it might be higher.
so you brought up numbers at a $8 million system, 7.7 contingency prices, whatever. I calculate $8 million system. Our share, first year bond payment, if we bonded our share, we'd be paying $375,000 for the first year. In the 20th year, we would be down around $220,000 per year. Now, do we have to put a bond all the money and then pray to get the grant, or how does it work?
That's principle. I think we would do short-term financing until we knew exactly what our obligation was, then we find a bond. You don't want to be locked into funding because you be reimbursed back from the state, and then you got the interest locked into 20 years. But I think we have to short-term bond until we can finish the project, pay off what we owe, and then bond.
Neutral point, what your number is, 3/5 of a mil,
No, it's probably a little bit higher than that, because the mill is running about 475.
okay,
Yeah, so maybe it's 3/5, yeah,
3/4, whatever.
Yep.
Somewhere in there,
yeah,
and the front mill rate is only
27, 27.3. I don't know, do you have the current mill rate?
I don't.
Just 27.3. I don't know.
45.91 is
Yeah, it changed.
at the result.
Oh, okay. All right, well,
Kelly, maybe,
Yeah, I have it right. We're talking big numbers, so it's scary, but when you translate it into the impact on the tax base, I don't think is that. Or,
No, it's not, that's why I wanted to put the number out there, but please check my math, but. I'm guessing it's somewhere south of $400,000
Yeah.
first payments and under. Around 225 on our 20th year.
yeah, that's consistently what things take.
Yep.
So you managed to go to
Right.
May Kelly, to add to your inquiry regarding when did we decide to go one way or the whole school? Some of the driver is this availability of the grant. Is that is only guaranteed for, 1 or 2 years and then it goes away.
Right, my question only was whether the committee had considered cost when it was deciding that this was the way to go. Did they do it in a vacuum that only, what we think is in the best interest of the school, regardless of cost? Or was there a cost benefit analysis done as part of that? Because Ernie started by saying that the committee is the group that was the experts on this. They had spent a lot of time getting into it. I was just wanting to know the scope of what they consider.
And also the A-Wing, these numbers, A-Wing represents over 40% of this whole, for the whole school, A-Wing is 40% of the cost. So, but it has.
There's
And a lot of which, yeah, Mike.
Hi, everyone. I've been listening, taking it all in. I might be a little redundant from last year in previous meetings. But I think that, when you look at this, I don't know anyone that is ever, super excited to say, we're gonna go out and find a way to spend 7 million on HVAC or 8 million on HVAC, right? The reality is the cost that comes when it comes to schools, right? Those things are expensive. So, I know that is obviously the big concern, but when you look at it, and I brought this up, I want to say it again, why we're doing it, or why we want to do it. Every school that is new, that is constructed in state Connecticut, has air conditioning in systems. If it wasn't good, positive, or needed, they would not put those in all of those new buildings. We are not building a new order, right? I don't think we've ever had any discussion at the Board of Ed or in town or anything that we're planning in our town to build a 60, 70, $80 million building, right? That's not what we want to do or what we think we need to do. A part of maintaining and updating the system is a necessity, not only for the learning environment, for students, for teachers, right? Not only that, but what also goes along with the standards and what the law says. And we brought this up multiple times, right? That when you have an opportunity like this for the grant, you can say, well, why do we want to do this? We don't want to pay for that. I understand, and I'm not in disagreement that extreme cost. But the big piece is these sort of updates to a school, right? It's very different, and I think it's very difficult to try to compare a residence, a home of 2,000, 2,500 square feet to 100,000 square foot school, with 500 plus individuals. That have different standards, different equipment, different laws that go with it. And so when we sort of look at it, this grant came up is the idea that, if you have to make these updates, whether it's right now, we want and can as a community, as a town, or we are forced to down the road, if it happens where we decide, as a town, we don't want to do this, there's the possibility that as you see the new legislation and laws that are here, that it won't be a choice. It will be mandated upon us to do it. And then we would not have that grant to be able to cut 48% off. Right. So I think that's been the big piece of why, it's not that we don't want to do upgrades or updates in general. Right. That I think we have to do those to the building, all of the time. But when you have something like this that comes up, something that's so costly, like an HVAC system for a school, you're not going to find a cheap version for that, updating electrical. You can get, the state to cover 30% of it, you consider it. And again, going back to the point, and Steve brought it up. Do we want to get 48% of one wing and have to pay for the rest 3, 4, 5 years down the road on our own, or go for the play? So I'm totally in for me, an understanding of the concern about the cost and concern about these things. I just didn't be worried about, again, 3, 4 years down the road, 5 years down the road, where something comes up where we are required to pay for the entirety and there is no, or we don't have an option for a grant. And then we have to put the entire bill, which by the way, 3, 4, 5 years from now, it won't be 7, 7 or 7, 8, it'll be 8, 9. 9, 10. So, just something from my perspective to consider that's throughout this whole process. And to say, again, nothing of, having a school that is air conditioned, air quality is good for the kids, the teachers, the students, which is going into, all of the buildings that are being built throughout the state by the districts. But that's just my 2 cents.
Go ahead, Mark.
I was gonna ask, what are our odds? This, we were not the first year last year. And that was because it sounded the other getting reimbursed from the state, somebody said other people are spending money. And we're getting reimbursed.
The town that got awarded in one year, didn't finish the project,
Yes.
must have funding or whatever.
Yeah, so what are our odds this time? Chances?
I have no idea. Why did you say that? Saying that. Who knows, I works with the states and grants. We will better our odds because they've done work. They tell us exactly what we need, okay? We pay good money for that. That's number one. Number two, we're ready to go forward, I think. If we decide we're ready to go forward. So the money right now is there. When you're ready and you seem like you're ready, everything's in a row. But I've also talked to Senator Austin and our Representative Tim Ecker. They are ready to put pen to paper and put their weight behind our request because we will be ready to go, because we have done all this. So what are our odds? Again, I have no idea.
But they're hard.
I think they're better than last year, about 52%. I don't know, I think we put ourselves in better.
So can I just maybe add and maybe give Bob or maybe elaborate? So part of when we were vetting the various engineering firms, Civil Petroleum, one who was awarded, one of the main selling points of Civil Petroleum was again their track record, their experience with dealing with the grant, and we've actually had interaction outside of the grant capacity with the DAS, right? And you're something you think we're very interested in. Yeah, and what we said your experience with.
Sure, yeah, I mean, certainly as a firm, we are up to the EAS several times a month. So we are familiar with the people, the processes and the paperwork. And then relative to the grant process itself, as I think I mentioned earlier, we did the grant submission for the first time on the first round for the city of Waterbury, and our paperwork was accepted for 8 schools in the city of Waterbury. I do think they have a little bit of an advantage being a larger city municipality, but
With 7.7 billion, I was very impressed.
And there's a very detailed guidance that DAS provides out there. It has a rubric of the requirements and the required forms, and part of the agreement is they've already started persistence in filling out many of the forms, and again, we've got professionals behind this to really try it. Yes, ma'am.
So in presenting this to the town, can we ask in a referendum or whatever, can we ask for one or the other, for people to vote on either a wing only or the wing?
No, that's a yes, no.
No, it can only be a yes, no.
So we have to decide where we want to go with that.
Can I ask the Board of Education a question? I was at a forum recently where someone asked you, Mike, if you had a magic grant, no strings attached, $500,000, what would you spend it on? And you spoke to how important it would be to focus on programming with the school. You get $14 million a year from this town. You could allocate those funds in any way. Is this so important that the Board of Education would allocate some of its funds to this project? Is it that important to this Board of Education? You guys are the ones who are charged with this responsibility for the school. Are you guys willing to put your dollars into that?
Yeah, so right before I brought up program piece, I said, number one is health and safety of the students and staff, in school, which includes, right, this. And so I think that's, you know, paramount, which this is a part of. So your question, do you mean like, we're prepared to take our dollars to do
Right, I
what
mean,
for?
we're thinking it's gonna cost maybe $300,000 a year if we bond it. On average, is the school board willing to say, we're willing to put some of that skin in the game? Because it's that important to us to do this. We have dollars, we allocate them in certain ways, we're willing to use some of those dollars allocated toward this project because it's that important to us.
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, honestly, I would have to take a look at our budget coming up, what we have, what we need, what resources the kids need. I don't know that I can answer that question in terms of, you know, I can't sit there and say, and I would want to say, yeah, we're gonna say, put X amount of dollars together, and then we go look and say, oh, well, so it's either paying for this or we need a math teacher. You know, I don't know that we could say that right now, you know.
But it's always like choices, I think.
Yeah.
And I wasn't expecting you to have a definitive answer tonight, but is that, I think that's an important question that we need to know. Is it that important to you as a Board of Education and the representative of the school? That you're willing to contribute towards that? That would be important for me to make in my decision.
No pressure, Mike, but as you go through that, did you consider the, Bev West Dakota, I can never remember the name of it, $300,000 extra.
No, absolutely.
No, absolutely. Just take it, no pressure. Please.
So we have more special needs kids now there, and then there, it's a tough question.
They always know they're coming, we always have to budget it in at the beginning of the year, so.
Sometimes they come in and then we.
Yeah, but it's never had touched on option fund, so it's never.
I understand.
The problem here, it's not really a problem, it's a benefit. We live in a town where we're gonna take care of it, it's gonna come in.
I understand.
The way I look at it is there's 300,000 sitting there, it's been sitting there for years. It'll sit there for a lot more years because, as it says, if we know the funding, we budget in advance.
It takes care of a portion of 1 year.
Yeah, I know, I'm not recommending anything, I'm just saying, we're thinking about stuff. That's not.
But if we apply for the grant, we don't even have to do that, because then, or get the grant and then we do bonding, we'll have money coming in to pay it.
We still have to pay the money.
Right. Oh, so you think.
And I'm thinking, just not supposed to pay the whole $7 million.
I just want to, the bond and the grant is still everybody's tax dollars. It's not money that just falls out of the sky. It still comes from people who have trouble buying their groceries.
What could you do us all a favor and, please send them up what the realistic numbers are? If it's your.
Yeah, what I'll do, I already know, I'll call Bill Lindsay tomorrow and we'll get actual, some of the financial and anything else, real numbers based upon real bond.
Thank you.
Yeah, how much it's gonna cost the taxpayer.
That'll be my budget tomorrow.
Thank you, Chris. We've had enough discussion. Okay. So at this point, I make a motion to adjourn. All those in favor? All those opposed? Again.